Welcome to Did Nothing Wrong Live. I'm Griff Sombke. With me are McKenzie and Robert Silverman. Guys, how's everything going? How are you doing?
Well, better than Tucker Carlson. Pretty good.
Low
Pretty
bar,
good.
low bar.
Low bar. Well. I mean, are we doing Tucker in real life or that pre-recorded message he did for CPAC Hungary, where he was still in the studio and he still looked like Tucker before, the beard. He's probably got a beard now, and I mean,
Sure.
I wanted to talk scraggly hair, and the gray is kind of getting through more because why do your hair? There's no makeup.
Exactly.
It's just a slow
You're not
descent.
going out. You're not going out. You're stuck in here. You're just gonna sit here and rage about everything that's gone wrong in your life in the last couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fine, in case you wanted to know.
Oh,
Yeah, because
hi. Oh, I didn't see you on the
yeah,
screen. Hello. Well,
yeah, I'm fine. I mean,
yeah.
the
I
Mets
I
are,
so-
are
I
playing
thought you might be Tim
terribly.
Pool, the hat, but no, I'm sorry.
Because of the bee, yeah,
Beanie.
yeah, I know, I get it. I'm having a bad hair day, so I decided to Tim Pool it and beanie myself up, as opposed
Mm,
to getting some product in. I don't have a styling team here either, unfortunately. All
yeah,
I've got
maybe
is
one
this
day.
weird Kubrickian backlight going, so but no styling team in my home studio.
Yeah. So Jay, this week you wrote an article about Tucker Carlson, and it's a doozy. Absolutely. You can find this on our website at didnothingwrongpod.com. Tucker Carlson became who he pretended to be. Pretty
Yeah,
good work.
I had to that first paragraph. I had to explain that this is not a good person who became radicalized into some terrible person. It's just a terrible person who became a worse version of himself, consciously or unconsciously. I don't know. And Robert has mentioned the idea of audience capture to me, which honestly I hadn't heard the term. I mean, I've thought about it, and I've thought about the consequences of if you're a guy who reads 4chan every day, if you're a guy who reads the Donald every day, and you talk to people who also read that and read VDare and all these white nationalist conspiratorial sites, how does that not change you? How does that not affect how you see the world? And especially when you go out there every day and you kind of regurgitate these things you've read, and then your audience claps and says, "Oh, you're the greatest." How can that? I mean, essentially, am I?
Well,
That's
no, you're right. Tucker Carlson, I mean, via reporting, I think it was the Times who reported this in their long series on Tucker Carlson last year. He was obsessed with not just what were, say, the Nielsen ratings for any particular show. They would do minute by minute, uh, like they were able to track minute by minute how the audience was responding to a segment, to a particular line, to a guest. And Carlson paid very close attention to that. He was doing, look, he was doing what someone selling a product is doing, which is throwing out as many different versions of the same, again, like, Chan culture talking points and seeing how the audience responds. And all he did was feed their audience's fear and paranoia right back to them. And at a certain point, I think what you said is very smart, which is that whether he believes these things that he said on air to an audience that usually was around 3 million people a night, that's not even counting the kind of the people who would tune in to YouTube clips and other
mhm.
segments of this on social media, um, is irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether he believes it or not. It doesn't matter whether this was all just a character. It the end result is the same, which is you are mainstreaming the great replacement theory.
Mhm.
You are talking about how immigrants make America a dirtier and poorer place. You are basically positing everybody who does not look like Tucker Carlson as an existential other who is not who is out to get you and is out to harm you. And the
Right.
best thing that you can do is, he talks about this all the time, get out of the cities because the cities are a cesspool. Flee
Mhm.
to some kind of agrarian back to the land like nativist fantasy and arm yourselves heavily, because all of these people in these teeming urban metropolises, they want to hurt you. So leave, and please be heavily armed once you do leave, because they'll come get you.
Mhm.
That's the fear that he was selling. And it was, I think we can say without a doubt, as a product, people bought it.
Absolutely.
So I don't care what he really thinks. I really don't care. This was something that there's an excellent profile that a journalist in Iowa named Liz Lenz wrote. I highly recommend her newsletter if you're not subscribed. It's called Men Yell at Me. And she's a fabulous, fabulous reporter and writer.
Yeah,
And she
you
did
sent
this
me that.
profile.
It was great. Sorry
Yeah,
to
it's
interrupt, but
great.
it's really
Yeah,
good.
yeah. It's really great. And it begins with saying Tucker Carlson is shouting at me. And then while shouting, he's denying that he's shouting at me, which is in, one tidy little opening paragraph, a wonderful description of what Tucker Carlson does. And then he gets angry at her for even suggesting that he's shouting at her, and he's shouting at her while he's doing that. And what Liz wrote is that the goal of the story, and there were a lot of Carlson profiles coming out at the time. This was, I think, 2018, right after he got his show, and a lot of people were asking the same question, which is that you did, which is what happened to Tucker Carlson? The answer is, and the answer that Liz comes up with is, who cares?
Mhm.
Who cares what turned him into from a bow tie wearing wasp into a blood and soil nationalist? It does. I mean, I think the answer, which again you wrote, is very simple, which is that Tucker Carlson doesn't actually believe anything. So in the early 2000s, that's what he was. He was a descendant of Buckley, and if you occasionally got a little spicy John Birch type stuff like mixed in there, so be it. But there was nothing he said that would exclude him from the Washington, D.C. cocktail circuit.
No.
Mhm.
The TV people decided they did not want more Tucker Carlson.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so by 2005, he's appearing on Dancing with the Stars and dancing very badly. Do not watch Tucker Carlson dance. I beg of you, do not watch
Telling
Tucker
me that
dance.
man can't dance. Wow.
Tucker Carlson cannot dance. And then, he tries to fund he creates this site called the Daily Caller, and he makes this huge stink at CPAC because he goes on stage, in front of a convention room, and he says, "Look, you guys may hate the New York Times and think they're your enemy, but when they write something, they get it right. And that's what we in conservative media do. We need to do journalism. We need to report out stories that are rigorous and true." And the idea behind the Daily Caller, at least that's what Carlson said in the beginning, was we are going to build out a rigorous journalistic outlet that, yes, will have a conservative point of view and we'll publish, say, conservative op-eds. That's what we are. We'll make no bones about that. We're not going to hide that. But it's all going to be undergirded by the fact that they're going to do investigative, hard-hitting stories. And nobody read them because conservative, yeah,
Yeah.
nobody read that early iteration of the Daily Caller. So he stocked his writing staff with white nationalists, and suddenly he got a lot more readership.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he got his chance to sit in the big boy Fox chair again, that's where the Republican Party was.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson is a giggling hyena like sucking nullity.
Yeah.
That's what he is. He will say it's not like Ron Burgundy. He will read whatever's in front of him, but he will say and do whatever it takes to have more people give money to Tucker Carlson and more people pay attention to Tucker Carlson, if not on a cable news network now, because I think that horse is out of the barn. But
Yeah. It's
on whatever Rumble, Substack, LOL, Newsmax streaming platform eventually just throws an enormous pile of cash in his face. They'll keep doing that. He will, if for some reason the Republican Party were to transform into, radical vegan eco-fascists, then Tucker Carlson would be holding up in Cop City right now.
Absolutely, he would. The man
Yeah.
is he is a product of whatever his environment is, and when his environment requires him to spout off great replacement talking points, he'll do it, and he'll do it with gusto. He is absolutely that guy. And it's very clear that when you're the guy that VDare runs a thank you letter to
Yeah.
Thank you for getting our point out there and saying the things that
I mean, Weave was saying this, and
Yeah.
Stormfront was writing this in 2017 when he first started, his Fox show. They were saying this person is simpatico to our ideas. And it was, because that's who the people, he hired people like that at the Daily Caller. He hired the person who was reading his message boards to be a producer at Fox, and he was writing horribly racist things on his message board. Like, that's where he got his material from. They were strip mining the most god awful, like toxic sewers of the internet, and giving it a nice little polish, and maybe adding a couple more 50-cent words in there. But in the end, there was no difference. It was mainstreaming white nationalism. And now we have, there is I don't know if you could put a number to it, but there is a hardcore dedicated white nationalist base in this country now. And I don't know how many generations it's going to take to go away, if ever.
Well, I remember reading stuff from the neo-Nazi group, the Right Stuff, and I remember them talking about how Tucker, I've read this, stuff and researched this stuff in so many places that I can't even remember where it was at this point. It was years ago, and I remember being struck by the fact that they were kind of praising Tucker and how he was mainlining and getting their talking points out there, but they didn't actually want to praise him because they knew he would get hurt by that actual, oh, he's our guy, oh, we love him. But it was very clear that he's their guy, and they wouldn't do that if they didn't need him and want him and feel a sort of kinship there. But I think even recently with we got the text in the Dominion lawsuit where Tucker said he was sick of Trump and wanted to be rid of him, and they were almost there and all this. And then it comes out, and then he says, no, I that was just the heat of the moment, and I love Trump and all of this. and then he did that interview with Trump where he barely got to speak, and he's Trump just keeps just berating him and I had this great meeting with Kim Jong-un. You didn't do a good job. You kind of messed it up.
Yeah,
but
I screwed that up.
And Tucker's, oh yeah, I'm sorry. And he's just meek over there. And I guess I realized that
he's just like, you're gonna eat a whole steaming bowl of fecal matter in exchange for this.
And he did.
If there is one talent that Trump has, it's identifying a weakness in a person, or identifying something that upsets them or he knows will hurt them, and then just pushing on that soft spot again and again and again and again, sadistically. And it absolutely, oh God, he just said, eat my entire boot, lick, spit, polish, and then grab a knife and fork. You're just going to just slurp it up, buddy. Here it is, Boot City.
Well, and I think Tucker did it because the alternative is losing that base of support and becoming irrelevant. And he really, really does not want to become irrelevant. So
he's terrified of it. I mean, that fisheye lens, which looked like it came out of a rap video from like 2003 video that he shot himself from his home studio. I was saying, you try to parse, like, first of all, it was 2 minutes and Tucker said absolutely nothing. He said nothing at all. It was just meaningless pablum. But what he's saying is the only message there was to those people who will cough up X dollars a month to continue watching him. It was a way of saying, please hang on. I will give you your favorite TV show again soon. Just wait and don't listen to the mean meanies at Fox News.
Nope.
And they, who have betrayed you. That was the only thing. That was all he did.
Don't forget.
Speaking of leaked messages, I want to talk about the most recent one that the New York Times wrote about, the one where he said that he enjoyed the experience of watching some random protester who naturally Tucker, I guess, thought was Antifa, getting curb stomped and thinking, yay, more of that. And
Yeah.
of course, the line that broke everyone up is, well, that's not the way a white man would fight, which, man, that is some purebred wasp racism right there.
Well,
That was
Griff,
Tucker Swanson, Carlson, like purebred stuff. Man,
Grew up in Spokane, Washington in the late 80s and early 90s around people who were definitely a little bit on the Nazi skinhead persuasion. And one of the jokes we had at the time was, do you know how many Nazi skinheads it takes to change a light bulb? 5.
how many?
5. 1 to change the bulb and 4 to back him up. Because these guys, I mean, the idea that white guys don't is just Tucker. Maybe
yeah, I don't, I really don't get that. And it's, I understand it's, oh, white men are, I guess they should have put on their suit of armor and gone to
Yes,
save
what
the
were they going to
damsel.
do? Should they have challenged Antifa to a duel? Should the
Yeah.
Proud Boys have brought their seconds in there for it? Should they have done it in a gentlemanly fashion? But the amazing thing is, and people have seemingly forgot this, that is exactly how Tucker Carlson fights, and he's mentioned it himself. There's a story, which if you
Oh,
want
no.
some old Tucker Carlson, we're talking about Tucker Carlson on air told this anecdote, or maybe it's on a radio show. He tells this anecdote about how he's in a bar somewhere and a guy flirted with him.
Huh.
And this bothered Tucker. So he came back with a I'm not sure if it's a friend or a couple of friends of his, grabbed the guy and slammed him up against the bathroom wall for mistakenly thinking that Tucker might be interested. So actually, Tucker Carlson, according to you, that's how a white man fights.
Mm-hmm. Wow, he did a literal gay bashing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Not even
Yeah.
slightly shocking, but a little amazing. And so, yeah, for this guy to come around and pretend that this isn't exactly how things happen in these circumstances is just, you're on something, buddy. No way. No way.
Yeah.
No way.
It's
Like him,
just,
everything's racial. Everything.
yeah, it just doesn't, like, people fight, and some people fight dirty and some people try not to, and then maybe they lose because it's people just, if you have the numbers, you have the numbers, and if you don't, you're shit out of luck. And
Right.
white, black, brown, I don't know, but he has, it's all this ideal of of course he wants to save the white race because it is superior in every way, and in his head he's created that reality. So
Yeah,
these guys,
very stylized idea of what white people are and what white people do. And when you're dealing with guys like him who are essentially white supremacists, everything they do has to be better. They have to look at everything through a racial lens. That's so much of a big part of that guy's identity, is like being white. It's huge for him. It's the way that guy looks.
It's, to me, it's interesting because, of course, this week, one of the major stories has been the homeless person who was killed on the subway for the crime of, I think, being homeless and having a mental health episode.
yeah.
As someone who has been on a lot of subways in my life, I have seen every manner of freak out by all kinds of people. Not necessarily, like, I've seen homeless people freak out. I've seen bros freak out. I've seen women freak out. I've seen, cops freak out. I have seen every single person I have seen, lose their bit in one way or another. There has never been a moment where I thought it's going to require someone, me, another passenger, physically intervening in order to stop this from escalating into real serious violence.
Yeah.
There have been moments where, one time there was a guy who was, really clearly in some distress. He wasn't making active threats against other passengers, but he was acting very erratically and sort of swinging his fist sort of generally at himself. He was clearly having a severe mental health crisis in that moment. Like, two large guys got up and sort of put themselves as a barrier, and they helped him off the train. What happened after that, I'm not sure. If they didn't help him off the train, but there was no need to put their hands on him in any way, shape, or form.
No,
If you've been in New York for any considerable period of time, you have experienced this also. The fact that the person who did choke him out was a rich kid from Long Island, who, by the way, his father is a police officer.
oh boy.
Yeah, we kind of
Well, I
see.
brought this up in sort of in relation to the like what Tucker Carlson was saying about like, well, a white man would never, gang up with three people and beat someone up. Is we're entering into a real moment now where it seems that if people are so untethered, they have been led to believe that taking matters into their own hands, using physical violence, is a perfectly reasonable response to everyday life stresses. It's the kid who rings a doorbell that an older gentleman doesn't know. It's a woman who pulls into the wrong driveway. You know, and in both those instances they had guns, so it was far, far, far worse. But
Yeah,
what Tucker and so many of these, right-wing social media influencers do is they make it clear that in response to the things that they are afraid of, they tell their audience that they need to act, and they need to act with violence. Tucker did this time and time and time again. He made it clear that political violence was a reasonable and proportional response in the world today to things like there's a black kid ringing my doorbell. There's a homeless person shouting, screaming, who knows what. There's a stranger approaching me. That kind of, even leaving out the racial demographics of this, the gender demographics of this, like even leaving out all these things, what they have done more than anything is instill this culture of absolute paranoia, fear, and loathing in America, where physical violence is a proportional response. And of course, we're a nation with more guns than people, so we're all armed to the freaking teeth.
Mhm.
And that to me is the part that is terrifying. Like, okay, you know what, kid from Long Island, you may have for a second there thought you were doing a good deed, but I am sorry, unless someone shows me video of this guy openly trying to harm someone, not just saying, I don't care what happens, I want to die, I want to go to jail, or like even I'll F a person up. Unless there were an imminent threat, there was a way to diffuse that situation. But and I'm not saying that this guy watched Tucker Carlson, was a Fox News fan, but boy, would I not be surprised if he was.
well,
But
and I think it's telling that right on cue, the MAGA types, the people who love
of them.
Tucker Carlson, every one of them defending this guy. Every one of them.
Defending him up the wazoo.
He
Like
did
people
nothing
like,
wrong.
Katya Sargon of Akkad is out here being like, we should no, that's like the response to dealing with a situation that is, yes, possibly a little dangerous, yes, definitely threatening, sure, scary, and at a baseline level, really goddamn annoying to have to deal with at the end of the person's workday, that this is an acceptable way to deal with it.
Absolutely. So one thing that really got to me on a personal level about that whole situation is that I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since 2005. I've had my share of time in that milieu, and I know what to do in that particular circumstance. I could sit here and point out all the flaws in what that guy did. And you have to know that when you put a hold on that's going to block both carotid arteries for an extended period of time, you run the risk of killing that guy. It really struck me as like the most graphic display of excessive force I've seen, and I've seen a lot of videos like that. And it just really absolutely got to me that like this is a level of force that never should have been used. This is once the guy is out, you could have, I mean, forget all the rest of it. He kept that hold on that guy some news reports were saying 15 minutes. Somebody's going to go to
I
sleep.
thought
that-
it was 4. I mean, there's no way to know unless, I mean, there's the video that they have, like, but
I've seen a quick
Well, and
segment
it's the
of that
Daily
video.
Mail, so it's probably they edit stuff so much and change it, and who knows. The question I had for you, Griff, because I know you've been to some seminars and talked with police
Right.
who deal with this and train in this. Did it look like he had any amount of training and he forgot it or was bad at it, or did it just look like he's some guy who thought he knew what he was doing?
Well, here's what I am gathering based on this. Most of the armed services have switched over all of their hand-to-hand combat programs to a jiu-jitsu based or a grappling based curriculum, for the simple reason is that it's absolutely far more effective and far more useful in a hand-to-hand situation than, say, teaching somebody how to strike or teaching somebody, how to use a stick or whatever. This is just far better to deal with it. I would say that the guy has had something that looks like Army combatives, Marine Corps combative program, something along those lines. And the execution is the kind of thing that you would do if you sort of knew how to do that, but you knew how to do it really hard. You could go a lot harder than the guy. So what he did was he came up from behind this guy. He was never, from what I understand, physically in any danger whatsoever. The guy who jumped him, he came on this guy from behind, basically put what we would call a mataleo or a rear naked choke on the gentleman and took him down. But the thing is, once you're in that position he was in, he could have let go of the chokehold. If he's really
Right.
and the car was empty by the end.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of the video, when he's on the ground, that subway car is empty.
You have,
and he wasn't going anywhere, is what you're saying. Absolutely. Like he didn't. Yeah.
He had control of the guy to the point where the guy isn't getting up. He obviously knew how to hold what we would call back mount, which is being able to use your hips and your feet to flatten him completely out. That guy isn't going anywhere unless the guy wants to let him go. He could have let go of the neck at that point. And if you're really worried about getting hurt, transition your hands to his hands and hold them on the ground. At that point, if you're really worried about like physically restraining a guy, this is what the police do. This is what the police are trained to do. This is what Gracie survival tactics will walk you through in a seminar on how to handle this stuff. And it just, watching this guy throw this, potentially lethal chokehold, because what that choke does is it blocks off both carotid arteries, both sides of the neck. Well applied, the guy's going to pass out from lack of blood to the head in about 7 to 10 seconds. That's going to be unconscious right there. At that point, he is no threat. He is sleeping.
And then you have to think what's going through his mind. And I think Robert spoke to this, and I think it speaks to some kind of societal rot, whether or not this guy, I don't know what was going through his head, but maybe he just thought he could get away with it, or maybe he's been conditioned to believe that this is somehow acceptable. I don't know. I don't know what if anything was happening to him, or if he was just so laser focused that he just didn't do anything different. But there is something wrong in a society that at least roughly half the country sees this and says that's fine. Yeah, that's okay. He didn't pose a threat to anyone. No problem. That's all right. He's a vet, so he's probably one of our guys. So we'll defend him.
Yeah. And that's just,
there's a whole bunch of people screaming about, like, because there were protests in the city this week. Ocasio-Cortez put out a very strongly worded statement on Twitter about basically, saying this was a murder in broad daylight. Whether or not you want to call it murder, I mean, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of whether this was, manslaughter or murder or a disregard for human life or whatever you want to.
Right.
I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah. Not a lawyer,
but
he killed that guy.
Not a lawyer. But There are none of them. None of the, I mean, there is a wonderful article, he says, suggesting people read more articles from Aaron Gordon Advice, who is a transportation reporter, wonderful transportation reporter. And he outlines, it's a story that's ostensibly about what's going on about Philly that has set up social services in the SEPTA system so that they can meet the homeless population where they live. Because, like in any other major city, with the lack of shelters, with the lack of a social safety net in this country at all, when they're going into major transportation hubs just to get out of the elements or to not have to sleep literally on the street, that way people working in social services can bring them in there, give them food, give them a hot bath. If they want to deal with, if they have substance abuse issues, they can point them towards counselors. If they want to, put them towards, mental health services, they can treat them towards someone who might be able to help. It is not a perfect system. It is not a permanent system. It is not a place that has a bed where they can stay overnight. It is a small, imperfect solution to a growing and worsening problem in a lot of major metropolitan cities right now. But what Gordon does in this story is he lays out the fact that when there is a person who walks into that room in SEPTA, there are a slew of societal failures and systemic failures that have led that person to that point. And the same thing is true for Jordan Neely. There are whole institutions in American life that got him to the point where he was in that chokehold. And to me, look, I personally, unless I hear otherwise, that looks to me like a situation where a person used absolutely excessive force, that was not a proportional response to the situation at hand. But the far greater concern, and I honestly wish my fellow lefties were spending more time talking about this too, is saying, well, okay, here, this is a tragedy. How you decide to apportion blame for this tragedy, your mileage may vary. But I really would love that, and we're not going to get in New York City with Mayor Super Cop here in charge. By the way, just can never be normal in any situation. He is, I don't know if you've had a chance to sample some of Eric Adams's pearls of wisdom starting from the talk that he believes there are superpowered crystals underground that make Manhattan such a special place. I kid you not.
We all thought Curtis Silva was the crazy one in that race.
I interviewed Curtis Silva back in 2017 or 18 for a story I did because the Hells Angels were starting to make an appearance, and I should have been a little bit tougher on Curtis and the Hells Angels, but I was honestly charmed by Curtis Silva. Sitting down and actually talking to him for all of his talk radio mishigas, he's no dummy. No. He really isn't. Actually, God, it was 2015. It's 2015, 2016, not 2017, 2018. Anyway, it's a good article. You can read it if you'd like. But the fact is, in New York, and for all that the right is screaming about the left saying, for tweets about saying defund the police departments are just as flush with cash, if not more than they've ever been. And we need a giant societal-wide reorganization of what to do with the fact that in the richest country in the world, we can't feed, clothe, and find shelter for Americans. That's a bad thing. And to me, I realize I'm saying, don't get mad about this tragic loss of life. Please focus on the fact that all of American society is failing. That's a bad pitch. You cannot put that on a marketing campaign or even a protest sign. But to me, that's the terrifying thing, is that we are not even beginning to address those. There is no major politician out there who is coming out and saying, actually, guys, we have failed. We have failed all of these people. And when it comes to psychiatric treatment and drug abuse treatment for people who end up falling, who get caught in the system and get spit out by the system, I am no doctrinaire lefty. There are, for all you lefty bleeding hearts, there are serious issues with even the best of them do when it comes to treating these problems. They are not easy, and they in fact may be unsolvable. But I'd like to have one politician. I'd like to have AOC instead of, firing off the hot take, say like, well, actually, here is my 12-point plan for for actually meeting the people who are forced to sleep in the subway, for whom the shelters are woefully inadequate. Here is what I'm going to focus on as a representative of my district in the great city of New York. And she's not doing that. And it can't just all be Bernie. I want like I would like one politician who is going out there saying this. And look, I'm sure there's a local rep or, who's actually doing this. And I'm sorry if I haven't heard your plaintive cries, but to me, we get so easily caught up into these because the right says something awful, and it's very easy to get mad at them for that. But again, I'm rambling. The thing makes me sad.
Correct. I'm in Seattle, Washington, and we have a lot of unhoused people here as well.
But they're all dressed in grunge, right? So it's kind of cool.
It's hard to tell, but I mean, when they're living in tents all over the sidewalk, and there are a lot of people who just got priced out of the market because we are now, like, I think the second most expensive city to live in the United States, right after New York. And we've got a lot of people that can't hack that.
Take that, San Francisco.
I mean, we're right there with you guys, and we have the same level of folks that just missed out on that don't have the resources, that don't have the salary to be able to keep up, and a lot of them have ended up on the streets in their cars, any number of other places. And we are doing things to solve this problem in theory, but it still seems a lot like we're just pushing them from one shelter to another shelter, one sweep to another sweep.
Well, speaking of people being pushed out of the system, it does bring up the conversation to me about the fact that essentially construction companies have been they've been priced out of building starter homes.
Right.
We have a housing crisis in this country, and we don't have anyone talking about it.
The market conditions have made it impossible. Like no builder is going to build low income housing unless they are forced to by a municipality. And municipalities have structured their tax bracket so it's impossible to do it. Like I know you scratch this one tragic murder and you immediately, it's steps away from a panoply of systemic issues in America that none of which are going to get. There's no magic wand. And I'm sorry if I'm talking out of turn. I'm not an expert in these subjects by any stretch of the imagination. But to me, I was like, okay, yes, this is like, I just was begging for one national voice to be like this, the reason things like this are happening. Yes, they are absolutely because there is an entire massive media apparatus telling Americans that they should be scared and fearful of every single person who doesn't look exactly like them. But like over here, like the late period capitalist system has set up just an entire yard full of rakes for anyone to step on. Well, and that will get them to this point.
I'll say this. The reason you look, and I know I'm going somewhere a little weird here, but the reason, if you look back at antiquity and you think about ancient Rome, which I think it was maybe around 100 to 200 AD or BCE, or I'm sorry, that's around 100 to 200. I'll just say AD. I haven't gotten used to CE after my Presbyterian upbringing.
No, the year 100 Anthony Davis is fine. That makes sense.
But the city had a population of roughly 1 million, which at the time was just unheard of and staggering. And there may have been places in China that were somewhat comparable, but in general, Europe never reached those heights again for over 1,000 years, closer to 1,500 or more. But why did they do that? Well, they had a bread dole. They would feed anyone in the city bread. If they were there and they could prove they were who they said they were, they could be fed. And you look at what we're offering in some cities at this point, and it's like, it's less than that. It's it's not even a loaf of bread. And it's just like you said, it's not even a discussion. It's like we've got these culture war issues that are in the forefront, that are the main conversation every day on social media and the news. Then we have these kind of policy issues in the background that are still talked about, and eventually something like the debt ceiling reaches its way into the forefront because it has to, and because it's been ignored, and it's getting to that point where there might be a real calamity. But that's really it. There's no third tier. There's no we're gonna shut down the tax havens, or we're still working on our healthcare system. We're gonna fix the homeless or unhoused problem. We're gonna do all these other things. And
There's no plan. And it's not like the system has collapsed. It just sort of keeps failing in all kinds of inexorable and clear ways, but still sort of lilting along while fundamentally broken.
and then no one is around to tell that story, really, of no one cares, kind of, because they can either pretend like it doesn't exist, or they don't even know it exists, because who's talking about it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, like you keep saying, I mean, like we're failing. We are failing, and this is almost the end result of what happens when you take a social safety net and shred it over generations. You cut funding for the social programs, you cut funding for things like Head Start, you cut funding for things like lunches in schools, and eventually you get to the point where you've got the police responding to things that they have no real, you should not have the police responding to certain calls because it's not what they do, and it's not what they should do. But because you've cut the funding for everything else, you've got no choice.
Yeah.
They're the only people that are left to come to the scene, and then you get things handled in a police fashion that should never have been handled that way, and things get worse. So we're going to have to make a decision at some point as a society to change this. I mean, I personally want to live in a society, and I think you guys probably do too, but
we live in a society.
We live in a society. I
That's my
want to
point.
live in a society. It beats the alternative in my mind.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to figure out, if we want to live in a society, how we get back to some of that. Because I think we can see now that the idea of gutting all of these things, the idea of wrecking the safety net, the idea of just making sure that nobody pays a dime more in taxes than they need to pay, you know, becomes this just really self-fulfilling
It's
prophecy.
immiserating.
Mm-hmm.
It's immiserating and exhausting for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
I mean, look, happiness studies, you know, they do all these things. It's bad science. It's these, they do these sociological studies, which are just nonsense, that are sort of happiness studies. And by all accounts, you know, the happiness index has been regularly dropping over the last 40 years.
Shocker.
And it's not a good indicator, because they ask, you know, look, you ask someone, are you happier now than you were X years ago? Why? It's again, bad science. But our wealthy overlords, our oligarchs, to me, they don't seem to, the people who have ostensibly won, I don't know, man, they don't seem to be having a lot of fun either.
No,
they don't seem to be enjoying it. And now, granted, I don't get to hang out with them. Maybe when you go to the Bohemian Grove with Harlan Crow and Justice Thomas, it's a rollicking good time, and I'm just missing out. But
does Elon Musk seem happy? Does the former richest man in the world?
He seems he's a terminal poster,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got brain worms.
And they're all chasing something. He's still chasing something.
He seems incredibly divorced. He is one of our most divorced men.
When does
but no
videos? That's what I'm
and
waiting.
And how much of his villain story goes back to his trans daughter and
tons.
Yeah, and his ex-wife
and Grimes Grimes leaving him for
Chelsea Manning,
for a trans woman.
Yeah. So,
I understand why he's not thrilled with trans people, but
I agree. They don't seem happy. But to bring this full circle, I did want to talk about Tucker a little bit more. And
who also does not seem particularly happy.
He does
just
not.
So we're clear.
But if there's one interview over the last 5 years at least that really, well, that clearly pissed him off more than anything, it's the one he didn't air, because I can't remember, it was the professor, I think, who essentially called him out on saying you're
the Danish, I think it was a Danish I'm not sure if it was a professor, I think he was an economist.
Okay.
I
can't remember.
But he was sort of,
he's a guy.
He's very European. He's a European guy. He's European. Let's call him.
Well, and he
that.
went to Davos and he essentially called them out for their hypocrisy. And Tucker loved that because, of course, the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and George Soros, whatever. But of course he loved that, and he thought his audience would love that, and he thought this guy was one of them. And it's always fun when they think they found a guy who's one of them, and then he wasn't, and he called out Tucker.
Lefty apostate who will back up all of his more noxious views.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, a guy whose name rhymes with Schmen Schmeenwald or someone like that.
Yeah. But and then they're done with you, and then they'll turn on you. And so he never aired it. And the crux of the argument was, yeah, Tucker, you don't talk about tax policies, and you don't talk about wealth inequality, and you don't talk about, hey, oh, you're free trade, and oh, corporate taxes are bad, and you don't want to talk. You want to talk about Ronald Reagan and trickle down, but you don't want to talk about what the corporate tax rate or what.
What he said is that Tucker Carlson is a millionaire paid by billionaires, and he will do whatever Rupert Murdoch
culture war stuff
wants him to.
Yeah, culture war stuff is not costing them money. Hate is not costing them money. If anything, it's increasing their money. And so, yes, of course, they just love Tucker going out there and spewing noxious hate on anyone he feels like, because what do they care? Yeah. And it means we're not talking about anything that's going to impact their wallets. And I don't know how we get away from that. I don't know how because the algorithms are now conditioned to elevate this culture war stuff that ends up getting us nowhere, but it's the prime mover.
Yep.
And on that incredibly heartening and cheerful, optimistic, feel good moment,
we're gonna go drink. No, I'm sorry.
No. I'm gonna sit quietly and watch my sad baseball team. That's what I'm gonna do. That's sort of like drinking.
You gotta have something. You gotta unplug. Yeah. You gotta have something.
Yeah. You gotta, whatever touching grass is for you, you have to go out and do that thing semi-regularly.
Get off 4chan.
Yeah.
Okay.
For you, Griff, it's studying Krav Maga and learning from the Gracie family, who, of course, we're not going to discuss their connections to Bolsonaro and, in fact, huge sectors of the right.
Don't get him started on this. Don't.
Have you guys watched Fighting in the Age of Loneliness?
No.
The video?
No.
This is an SB Nation video by John Boyce and Felix Biederman from Chapo Trap House. It's about a 2-hour long documentary about MMA called Fighting in the Age of Loneliness. I heartily recommend it. It's outstanding. And I say that as someone who's not an MFA fan at all, but it delves into all these issues. For you listeners out there, I recommend it. Mwah. There's also another one on the Seattle Mariners if we really want to get all Seattle about this. That's excellent as well.
Yeah, there was one good one that came out about the Mariners a couple of years ago, and as a lifetime Mariners fan, it's some years. It's really
it's great. I've watched it. That's another John Boyce joint. It is. I'm not a Mariners fan, but it's excellent. Anyway, Fighting in the Age of Loneliness. We'll leave a link on YouTube for anyone who wants to give it a watch.
Can do. All right, guys. Well, as always, I appreciate it. And we'll be back next week.
Talk to you soon. See you next week.